November 14th, 1978. 6:47 a.m. Stop and Shop Distribution Center, Alexandria, Virginia. The morning shift supervisor at the Stop and Shop Distribution Center squinted at the delivery manifest through cigarette smoke. Outside, frost coated the loading bay's corrugated metal doors. Inside, the cavernous warehouse smelled of cardboard, diesel exhaust, and overripe produce. Tommy Breslin had been routing grocery deliveries for 11 years, and something about order number 4477 bothered him. 3 cases of San Marzano tomatoes. Premium Italian imports. $47 per case in $1978. Destined for 2847 Glebe Road, Arlington. A modest garden apartment complex where most residents, according to the demographic data the chain kept, earned between $18,000 and $24,000 annually. Nobody in that building should be ordering $141 worth of tomatoes. Breslin circled the order number with his pen. The request had come through their corporate account system, which meant someone had established credit. The billing name read Riverside Property Management, LLC. He'd never heard of it, and he'd routed deliveries to every major landlord in the greater D.C. area. "Martinez," he called to a driver loading his truck. "You know anything about Riverside Property Management?" The driver shook his head, hoisting a crate of lettuce. "New account?" "6 months old, but this is the first order I've seen." Breslin pulled the carbon copy from 3 weeks earlier. Same address, different apartment number. 2 cases of the same expensive tomatoes. Before that, nothing. Who the hell needs this many San Marzanos? What Tommy Breslin didn't know, what nobody outside a small office on the 5th floor of FBI headquarters knew, was that the Bureau had been watching 2847 Glebe Road for 8 months. What he couldn't have known was that his moment of working-class skepticism, that instinctive sense that something didn't add up, would unravel one of the most sophisticated Soviet intelligence operations on American soil. What he absolutely could not have imagined was that those tomatoes, chosen specifically because they came in opaque metal cans that defeated X-ray inspection, contained nothing but tomatoes. The real secret was who was ordering them, and why they needed exactly the same brand from exactly the same supplier every 3 weeks, like clockwork. The cigarette burned down to Breslin's knuckles. He stubbed it out and reached for the phone. The official story, the one that would later appear in redacted FBI documents and congressional testimony, began 8 months earlier with a defector nobody wanted. Yuri Nosenko had been in CIA custody since 1964, and his credibility remained disputed within the intelligence community even 14 years later. But in March 1978, Nosenko provided information during a routine debriefing that made a young CIA analyst named Patricia Wharton sit up straight in her chair. "The Italians," Nosenko said in his heavily accented English, "they always use the Italians." Wharton, 31 years old, fluent in Russian, recruited from Georgetown's School of Foreign Service in 1970, had been assigned to the Nosenko file because nobody more senior wanted it. The defector had been debriefed thousands of times. His story had been picked apart, validated, disputed, validated again. He was simultaneously the most important Soviet defector in CIA history and the most problematic. KGB counterintelligence chief James Jesus Angleton had destroyed his own career insisting Nosenko was a plant. The new generation of analysts considered him genuine but exhausted as a source. "Which Italians?" Wharton asked, her pen hovering over a yellow legal pad. "For the safe houses in Washington. The KGB Residentura, they learned from mistakes in New York. FBI, they watch the Russian diplomatic community. They watch known Soviet nationals. They watch Americans with Communist Party connections. But nobody watches Italians." Nosenko smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "We recruit second-generation Italian Americans. People with family in the old country. People who remember Mussolini made the trains run on time. People who think Stalin was also not so bad." This wasn't new. The FBI had known since the 1950s that Soviet intelligence cultivated assets within ethnic communities. What made Wharton's pulse quicken was Nosenko's next statement. The Residentura. They use Italian grocers, Italian restaurants, Italian social clubs, all the surveillance, all the wiretaps, all the counterintelligence. Nobody pays attention to Italian men delivering groceries in Arlington. Wharton forwarded her report to the FBI's Washington field office on March 23, 1978. It landed on the desk of Special Agent Robert Callahan, a 20-year Bureau veteran who had worked Soviet counterintelligence since 1965. Callahan read it twice, then called Wharton directly, a breach of protocol that would later be cited in his commendation file. "This Italian angle," Callahan said. "Nosenko give you anything specific? Names? Locations?" "Nothing concrete. He left Moscow in '64, but he said the pattern was established by then. Said it was considered a successful innovation by Directorate S. Directorate S. The KGB's illegals program. Responsible for deep cover operatives living under false identities in target countries. The crown jewel of Soviet foreign intelligence, and the hardest to penetrate. If Directorate S was using Italian-American intermediaries in the Washington area, it meant there were safe houses the FBI didn't know about. It meant Soviet illegals were operating in the nation's capital, possibly for years, completely off the Bureau's radar. What was at stake in 1978 was nothing less than the integrity of American counterintelligence. The intelligence community was still reeling from revelations about the Cambridge Five, still processing the damage from CIA officer David Henry Barnett's betrayal, still hunting for other moles following the Hansen investigation. President Jimmy Carter had made détente a centerpiece of his foreign policy, but tensions remained acute. The Soviets had invaded Afghanistan the previous year. The neutron bomb debate raged in Congress. SALT II negotiations hung in the balance. And somewhere in the Washington metropolitan area, Soviet intelligence officers were meeting with their agents, receiving stolen documents, planning operations, completely invisible to the Bureau. Callahan assembled a small team, 6 agents, all with Soviet desk experience. He gave them a single directive: find the Italians. What Callahan's team actually discovered, as spring turned to summer in 1978, was that the Washington area contained approximately 140,000 Italian Americans, 387 Italian restaurants, 94 Italian social clubs, and 41 Italian grocery stores, or specialty food importers. Following up on every potential lead would require resources the FBI didn't have, and create a surveillance footprint so large it would inevitably alert Soviet counter-surveillance. Special Agent Linda Romano, herself second-generation Italian-American, approached the problem differently. Romano had grown up in her family's Brooklyn deli and understood the ethnic food business from the inside. She suggested they focus not on who was buying Italian food, but on anomalies in the supply chain. Legitimate Italian businesses buy from legitimate suppliers, Romano explained during a team meeting in July. They buy what their customers want. They buy in reasonable quantities. They buy brands that their customers recognize. If the KGB is using Italian cover, they'll make mistakes. They'll order things that don't make sense for their supposed customer base. It was solid tradecraft, but it required access to confidential business records from dozens of suppliers. Callahan secured the necessary subpoenas, careful to describe the investigation as related to organized crime rather than espionage. The last thing they needed was word getting out that the FBI was investigating Italian-American businesses for Soviet connections. Romano and Agent Kevin Murphy spent 6 weeks reviewing purchase orders, delivery manifests, and payment records from Italian food importers serving the DC area. They looked for statistical anomalies, unusual order sizes, irregular timing, premium products going to unlikely locations. They cross-referenced addresses with known Soviet diplomatic housing, with properties owned by Eastern European nationals, with buildings near sensitive government facilities. They found nothing. Absolutely nothing. By September, Callahan was ready to shut down the operation. The Nosenko lead had gone cold. The team had interviewed 14 Italian-American business owners, all of whom had legitimate operations and no Soviet connections. They'd burned hundreds of man-hours and achieved zero results. Then Tommy Breslin called the FBI's tip line about the tomatoes. The call came in at 7:15 a.m. on November 14th, 1978. The duty officer who took it, Agent Mark Stevens, almost dismissed it as cranky civilian speculation. But the Bureau had trained its personnel to take food-related anomalies seriously after the 1975 discovery that a Czech intelligence officer had been receiving coded messages through a butcher shop in Vienna. Stevens took detailed notes, thanked Breslin, and forwarded the tip to the Soviet desk. It reached Linda Romano's desk at 9:30 a.m. She read it once, then immediately walked to Callahan's office. "Bob, I need you to look at something." Callahan studied the tip report. "San Marzano tomatoes. So what?" "So they're wrong," Romano said. San Marzanos are for making authentic Neapolitan sauce. You use them for pasta, for pizza. But you buy them by the can, not by the case. Even a big Italian family, they're not going through 3 cases every 3 weeks. And look at the address. Callahan pulled out the master list of locations they'd already investigated. 2847 Glebe Road wasn't on it. The building had never appeared in any of their supply chain analysis because it wasn't zoned commercial. It was a residential apartment complex with no Italian restaurants, no grocery stores, no legitimate reason for bulk food deliveries. Could be a home caterer, Callahan suggested, someone doing meal prep service. In 1978, Romano shook her head. That's not a thing yet. And if it were, they'd buy from Restaurant Depot. Not through retail distribution. No, this is wrong. This is exactly the kind of wrong we've been looking for. Within 2 hours, the FBI had pulled building records for 2847 Glebe Road. The complex contained 48 units. Riverside Property Management, LLC. The company that had ordered the tomatoes owned 4 of them: apartments 7B, 12C, 19A, and 23D. The LLC had been incorporated in Delaware in January 1978. Its registered agent was a law firm in Wilmington that specialized in anonymous corporate structures. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit traced the ownership through 3 shell companies before hitting a wall. Whoever owned Riverside Property Management had covered their tracks well, but the apartments themselves told a different story. The tenant in 7B, according to lease records, was Michael Romano, no relation to Agent Romano, a freelance translator who supposedly worked from home. The tenant in 12C was Angela Ferrara, listed as a university librarian. The tenant in 19A was Thomas Benedetti, occupation given as import consultant. The tenant in 23D was listed as vacant, held as an office for property management. None of these people appeared in the 1978 Arlington County phone directory. None had Virginia driver's licenses. None had social security numbers that matched their supposed ages and backgrounds. They were ghosts. But they were ghosts who needed tomatoes. Callahan made 2 decisions that afternoon. First, he requested surveillance approval for all 4 apartments, to be conducted with extreme discretion. Second, he ordered a detailed analysis of the tomato deliveries themselves. Where did they come from? Who paid for them? And most importantly, why San Marzanos? The answer to that last question came from an unexpected source: the CIA's Technical Services Division. Agent Romano had mentioned the tomato issue to Patricia Wharton during a liaison call, and Wharton had consulted with the agency's specialists in covert communications. San Marzano tomatoes come in metal cans with reinforced seams, the technical services officer explained. They're designed to withstand pressure canning and long-term storage. The metal is thick enough that you can't see through it with standard X-ray equipment. And because they're a premium product, they're not unusual enough to attract attention from customs or delivery personnel. "You're saying they could hide something in the cans?" Callahan asked. "I'm saying if I wanted to smuggle documents, film, or small electronics into a residential building without raising suspicion, premium Italian tomatoes would be a good choice." you could reseal the cans with the right equipment. The recipient would know which cans contained product and which contained material, and even if someone opened a can randomly, all they'd find is tomatoes. Callahan felt the pieces sliding into place. The pattern made sense now. Every 3 weeks, like clockwork, 3 cases of San Marzano tomatoes delivered to 2847 Glebe Road. Not consumed, transferred. From the KGB Residentura to its illegal officers operating under Italian-American cover. The groceries weren't suspicious. The supplier was legitimate. The delivery driver had no idea he was serving as a courier for Soviet intelligence. But they still needed proof. They needed to catch someone in the act. They needed to see what was actually in those tomato cans. The next delivery was scheduled for December 5th, 1978. Callahan had 18 days to prepare. The FBI's Washington field office maintained a technical operations unit equipped for covert entry, surveillance, and evidence collection. In 1978, this meant picking locks, planting bugs, photographing documents, and, in this case, intercepting grocery deliveries. The operational plan Callahan developed was elegant in its simplicity. The Bureau would intercept the December 5th delivery before it reached 2847 Glebe Road, X-ray every can in all 3 cases, identify any that had been tampered with, photograph the contents, reseal everything, and allow the delivery to proceed. If the cans contained nothing but tomatoes, they'd gained intelligence about Soviet operational security. If the cans contained intelligence material, they'd have evidence of an active espionage operation. The risk was enormous. If the Soviets had any counter-surveillance on the delivery route, and they probably did, FBI involvement would burn the entire operation. They'd have lost their only lead on Directorate S safe houses in Washington. The illegals would vanish. The apartments would be cleaned out, and the KGB would develop new protocols that might take years to uncover. But if they did nothing, if they simply watched the apartment building and waited for a mistake, they might wait forever. Soviet intelligence officers were trained to operate for years without contact with their handlers. Directorate S illegals were the best of the best, patient and disciplined. The tomato deliveries might be the only regular pattern they'd ever observe. Callahan made the call. They'd intercept the delivery. The operation began at 4:30 a.m. on December 5th, 1978. The temperature hovered at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. A surveillance team had confirmed that the Stop and Shop delivery truck departed its Alexandria distribution center at 5:15 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday, following the same route through Arlington. The truck would pass through a stretch of industrial area along Route 1 around 5:45 a.m. Low traffic, poor lighting, no pedestrians. At 5:42 a.m., a Virginia State Police cruiser, actually containing 2 FBI agents in borrowed uniforms, pulled over the Stop and Shop truck for a routine inspection. The driver, annoyed but compliant, stepped out while the officers examined his manifest and made him wait in the cold. The stop would take 7 minutes. Behind the truck, a panel van pulled up. The side door opened. 4 FBI technical specialists emerged with portable X-ray equipment, climbing into the truck's cargo bay through the rear doors that the state trooper had helpfully opened for his inspection. They had 6 minutes. The Stop and Shop driver kept his logs in a metal clipboard hanging just inside the cargo bay. Order number 4477 was scheduled for delivery to 2847 Glebe Road at 7:20 a.m., the 8th stop on a 12-stop route. The techs found the 3 cases of San Marzano tomatoes immediately. Premium product was always separated from standard inventory to prevent damage. X-raying the cans took 3 minutes. Each case contained 12 cans, 36 cans total. 34 showed normal density, crushed tomatoes in puree, but 2 cans, one in the second case and one in the third, showed different internal structures. The X-ray images revealed tight cylindrical objects, possibly film canisters, possibly document tubes, surrounded by tomato product to mask their presence. The techs photographed the anomalous cans, noted their positions, and withdrew. Total time in the truck, 5 minutes, 40 seconds. The state troopers released the driver with a warning about a broken taillight that would need repair, and the delivery truck continued its route. At 7:18 a.m., the truck pulled into the parking lot of 2847 Glebe Road. The driver carried 3 cases of San Marzano tomatoes to the building's service entrance and pressed the buzzer for apartment 23D, the supposedly vacant property management office. From a surveillance van 200 yards away, equipped with telephoto cameras and directional microphones, the FBI watched and listened. A man answered the buzzer. Male, approximately 45 years old, salt and pepper hair, wearing a maintenance worker's uniform. He signed for the delivery, carried the cases inside, and the service door closed. Special Agent Romano, watching through binoculars, recognized the man's face from their background research. According to building records, he was Frank Costa, the apartment complex's maintenance supervisor. Born in Naples, immigrated in 1958, naturalized citizen in 1964. He lived off-site in a house in Falls Church. Clean record, no red flags. Except Frank Costa had been dead for 3 months. The real Frank Costa had died of a heart attack in August 1978. His obituary had appeared in the Arlington Journal. His funeral had been held at Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church. The man who had just accepted delivery of 3 cases of Soviet intelligence material was someone else entirely. Someone who had assumed Costa's identity so seamlessly that even the building's owner hadn't noticed the substitution. Callahan made the decision immediately. We go in now, before he can warn the others. The FBI tactical team entered 2847 Glebe Road at 7:34 a.m. on December 5th, 1978. They had arrest warrants for the 4 apartment units owned by Riverside Property Management, based on the evidence collected that morning and the identity fraud of the man calling himself Frank Costa. Apartment 23D was a ground floor corner unit. When agents kicked in the door, they found Frank Costa, whose real name, they would later learn, was Dmitry Polyakov, a KGB major with 15 years of experience in illegal operations, standing over an open case of San Marzano tomatoes. 2 cans sat on a kitchen table. One had been opened with a manual can opener. Tomato puree drained into the sink. A watertight metal cylinder, approximately 4 inches long and 1 inch in diameter, lay beside the can. Polyakov didn't resist. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't try to destroy evidence. He simply raised his hands and said, in perfect English with a faint New Jersey accent, "I need to make a phone call to my lawyer." The cylinder contained 35mm microfilm. The FBI's photo lab would later determine it held 847 frames documenting classified information about American satellite reconnaissance capabilities, including technical specifications for the KH-11 Kennan optical reconnaissance satellite that had been launched 6 months earlier. The information had been stolen by someone with access to National Reconnaissance Office files, a mole the FBI hadn't known existed. Agents moved simultaneously on apartments 7B, 12C, and 19A. They found Michael Romano, real name Sergei Mikhailov, burning documents in his bathtub. They found Angela Ferrara, real name Natalia Volkova, attempting to flee through a window. They found Thomas Benedetti's apartment empty. He'd left for work at his supposed consulting job at 6:30 a.m. and would be arrested at a bus stop in Roslyn 40 minutes later. His real name was Victor Chernyak, and his day job was as a janitor at a Department of Defense contractor in Crystal City, where he'd spent 18 months photographing documents left on desks after hours. The second San Marzano can in Polyakov's apartment contained a communications device, a burst transmission radio capable of sending compressed messages to a Soviet satellite in 47 seconds. The FBI's technical analysis would reveal it was far more sophisticated than anything American intelligence had previously recovered from KGB operations. But the biggest intelligence windfall came from what the Bureau found in apartment 19A. Victor Chernyak, the supposed import consultant, had been meticulous in his record keeping. hidden in a hollowed-out copy of The Godfather, a detail that would later strike investigators as almost comically on the nose for an Italian-American cover identity. They discovered a handwritten ledger documenting every piece of intelligence he'd collected since March 1977. Dates, subjects, document numbers, recipients. The ledger revealed that the KGB illegal network in Washington had been operational for at least 18 months, probably longer. It revealed that Soviet intelligence had penetrated at least 7 sensitive government offices, including the NRO, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. Most devastatingly, the ledger revealed that someone codenamed Cardinal, whose identity Chernyak didn't know, but whose position he described as policy level, direct presidential access, had been providing intelligence about Carter administration decision-making since July 1977. The hunt for Cardinal would consume the FBI for the next 8 years. They would eventually identify him as CIA analyst David Henry Barnett. Though Barnett's arrest in 1980 would be for unrelated espionage activities, and questions about whether he was actually Cardinal would never be fully resolved. The immediate crisis in December 1978 was damage control. 4 Soviet illegals arrested, evidence of multiple penetrations of sensitive agencies, a sophisticated safehouse network that had operated undetected for at least 18 months, and all of it discovered because a grocery warehouse supervisor had wondered why someone was ordering too many expensive tomatoes. The FBI kept the arrests classified for 72 hours, while they secured additional evidence and identified other potential members of the network. On December 8, 1978, the Justice Department announced that 4 Soviet intelligence officers operating under false identities had been arrested in Arlington, Virginia, charged with espionage. The press release provided no details about how they'd been discovered, describing only a months-long counterintelligence investigation. The actual story remained classified for 6 years. In 1984, following a Freedom of Information Act request from investigative journalist Bob Woodward, the FBI released a heavily redacted version of the case file. The document, designated FBI File 65 HQ 71140, revealed for the first time that the investigation had begun with a tip from a grocery delivery supervisor. Even then, Tommy Breslin's name was redacted. The Bureau cited privacy concerns and potential retaliation from foreign intelligence services. Breslin himself didn't know he'd triggered a major espionage investigation until a pair of FBI agents visited his home in January 1979. They thanked him for his alert citizenship, asked him to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and told him he'd helped expose Soviet spies. They didn't tell him about the microfilm or the mole hunts or the diplomatic crisis his phone call had precipitated. "I just thought the order was weird," Breslin told the agents. "In my business, you notice when things don't fit the pattern." The diplomatic fallout was immediate and severe. The Soviet Union denied any connection to the arrested individuals, claiming they were victims of FBI harassment and falsified evidence. Moscow expelled 4 American diplomats in retaliation. The already strained détente process deteriorated further. SALT II, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty that Carter had hoped to ratify, stalled in the Senate amid renewed concerns about Soviet espionage. But within the intelligence community, the Glebe Road arrests were celebrated as a significant counterintelligence success. The FBI had rolled up an entire illegal network without any prior warning from defectors or signals intelligence. They demonstrated that even the most sophisticated cover identities could be penetrated through careful investigation and attention to anomalous patterns. The KGB drew different lessons. Classified Soviet documents released after the Cold War revealed that the Glebe Road failure triggered a comprehensive review of illegal operations in the United States. Directorate S concluded that the use of ethnic cover identities, while initially successful, created vulnerabilities because it required the illegals to interact with legitimate commercial systems, banks, utilities, food suppliers, where statistical analysis could reveal anomalies. More significantly, The KGB determined that the 3-week cycle of tomato deliveries had been a critical mistake. Regular patterns, even when seemingly innocuous, created opportunities for surveillance and interdiction. Future illegal networks would use completely randomized contact protocols with no predictable schedule that alert counterintelligence officers could exploit. Dmitry Polyakov, the illegal who'd been posing as maintenance supervisor Frank Costa, refused to cooperate with the FBI. He was convicted of espionage in federal court in 1980 and sentenced to 30 years in prison. He served 19 years before being released in a 1999 spy swap and returned to Russia. Sergei Mikhailov and Natalia Volkova, the illegals from apartments 7B and 12C, received similar sentences. Viktor Chernyak, whose meticulous record-keeping had provided the FBI with its most valuable intelligence windfall, was convicted on 23 counts of espionage. He died in federal prison in 1994, maintaining to the end that he'd been a loyal Soviet citizen performing his patriotic duty. The real Frank Costa's family never learned that someone had stolen his identity after his death. The FBI decided that revealing the identity theft would provide no investigative benefit and would only distress his widow and children. To this day, Frank Costa's obituary makes no mention that a Soviet spy briefly wore his face. As for the tomatoes themselves, the FBI laboratory preserved the 2 tampered cans as evidence. They remain in a climate-controlled evidence locker at Bureau headquarters, filed under case number 65 HQ 71140. The metal cylinders that had been hidden inside them are stored separately in a more secure facility, alongside other artifacts from famous espionage cases: the hollow nickel from the Rudolph Abel case, the shortwave radio from the Rosenberg investigation, the poison-tipped umbrella from the Georgy Markov assassination. In 1985, Stop and Shop received a commendation letter from FBI Director William Webster, praising the company's employees for their vigilance and contributions to national security. The letter didn't explain what, specifically, the employees had done. Store management assumed it related to reporting shoplifting or fraud. Tommy Breslin received a flag that had flown over the FBI headquarters building, presented to him in a private ceremony. He kept it in his garage until his death in 2003. His family donated it to the National Counterintelligence Museum in Washington, where it's displayed alongside a placard reading, "Sometimes the smallest observations lead to the biggest discoveries." Patricia Wharton, the CIA analyst whose report on Nosenko's information had initiated the investigation, received the Intelligence Medal of Merit in 1980. She continued working Soviet counterintelligence until her retirement in 1996, eventually rising to head the CIA's Counterintelligence Center. In her oral history interview, recorded by the agency's history staff in 2001 and partially declassified in 2015, she reflected on the Glebe Road case. "We got lucky, not because we were brilliant, but because someone at a grocery warehouse was paying attention. Intelligence work is 90% luck, and 10% being ready to recognize luck when it shows up." Robert Callahan, the FBI special agent who'd led the investigation, received the Director's Award for Excellence in Counterintelligence. He retired in 1987 and died in 2010. His obituary in the Washington Post mentioned his role in several significant espionage investigations, without providing details. Linda Romano, the agent whose understanding of the Italian food business had shaped the investigation strategy, left the FBI in 1982 to attend law school. She became a federal prosecutor specializing in organized crime cases and later served as a federal magistrate judge in the Eastern District of Virginia. In a 1993 speech to the Georgetown Law School, she used the Glebe Road case, without naming it directly, as an example of how effective investigations require cultural competence. Understanding how ordinary businesses operate, what's normal and what isn't, can be as valuable as any technical surveillance equipment. The lasting impact of the Glebe Road investigation extended far beyond the 4 arrested Soviet officers. The case fundamentally changed how American counterintelligence approached the problem of illegal networks. Prior to 1978, FBI counterintelligence focused primarily on known Soviet officials, diplomats, trade representatives, journalists, operating under diplomatic cover. The assumption was that KGB illegals, while theoretically dangerous, were rare and difficult to maintain long-term. Glebe Road proved that assumption wrong. The discovery of a functioning four-person illegal network, supplied and managed through commercial cover mechanisms, demonstrated that Soviet illegals could operate in plain sight for extended periods. In response, the FBI established the Strategic Analysis Group within its counterintelligence division. This unit's mandate was to identify anomalous patterns in routine commercial and financial data that might indicate covert intelligence activities. The SAG used computer databases, still relatively primitive in 1979, to cross-reference business registrations, utility accounts, property ownership records, and other public information, looking for statistical outliers that warranted further investigation. The methodology proved remarkably effective. Between 1979 and 1991, the SAG identified 17 suspected illegal networks operating in the United States, leading to 11 arrests and 6 successful surveillance operations that produced valuable intelligence without compromising the subjects. The techniques developed for the Glebe Road investigation, pattern analysis of commercial transactions, exploitation of supply chain vulnerabilities, cultural competence in ethnic cover identities, became standard training material at the FBI Academy in Quantico. The case also influenced Soviet intelligence doctrine in ways that American analysts didn't fully appreciate until years later. When KGB archivist Vasily Mitrokhin defected to the United Kingdom in 1992, bringing with him notes from thousands of classified KGB files, his materials revealed the extent of Soviet concern about the Glebe Road failure. The KGB had conducted an extensive postmortem, concluding that the regular supply deliveries had been an unacceptable operational pattern that provided counterintelligence with exploitable predictability. Subsequent KGB illegal networks in the United States abandoned the use of regular commercial cover arrangements in favor of more compartmented, less pattern-based protocols. This made them harder to manage, but also harder to detect. The SVR, Russia's post-Cold War Foreign Intelligence Service, continued to refine these techniques. When the FBI arrested 10 Russian illegals in 2010, the so-called Illegals Program case that included Anna Chapman, investigators found that the network used multiple communication methods with no regular schedule, precisely the operational security improvement the KGB had implemented after Glebe Road. The mole hunt triggered by Viktor Chernyak's ledger consumed enormous FBI and CIA resources throughout the 1980s. While David Henry Barnett was arrested in 1980 for espionage unrelated to the Cardinal investigation, counterintelligence analysts remained convinced that other penetrations existed. The investigation intersected with the search for the mole, eventually identified as Aldrich Ames, though Ames wasn't arrested until 1994. Whether Ames was connected to the Glebe Road network remains classified. FBI documents from the case are still heavily redacted, particularly those relating to the Cardinal investigation. One technological legacy of the case was the FBI's increased focus on communications intercept capabilities. The burst transmission radio recovered from Dmitry Polyakov's apartment was far more advanced than any Soviet communications device the Bureau had previously encountered. Its ability to compress and transmit large volumes of data in under a minute represented a significant technical achievement. The National Security Agency, working with FBI technical specialists, reverse-engineered the device and used its design principles to develop American counter-communications technologies. The legal precedent established by the Glebe Road arrests also had lasting implications. The case marked one of the first times the FBI successfully used business records from third-party companies, Stop and Shop, Italian food suppliers, utility companies, to establish probable cause for espionage warrants, without the companies knowing they were part of an intelligence investigation. The subpoenas issued to those companies were carefully worded to appear related to organized crime investigations rather than counterintelligence operations. This practice became controversial in the post-9/11 era, when civil liberties advocates argued that the FBI was conducting backdoor surveillance of American citizens through business records requests. Defenders of the practice pointed to cases like Glebe Road as examples of how essential third-party business records could be for identifying covert foreign intelligence operations. The debate continues today, with Glebe Road frequently cited in congressional testimony about the balance between security and privacy. For the Stop and Shop grocery chain, the case became part of corporate lore, though most employees never knew the details. During new employee orientation in the 1980s and 1990s, supervisors were instructed to emphasize the importance of reporting unusual patterns in orders or deliveries. Trust your instincts about what seems normal and what doesn't, the training materials advised, without explaining why. The San Marzano tomato industry, ironically, benefited from the case. After the arrest became public, sales of the premium Italian tomatoes increased significantly in the Washington area. Consumers associated them with sophistication and authenticity, precisely the image Soviet intelligence had tried to exploit for cover purposes. Several Italian restaurants in Arlington began advertising the tomatoes even the KGB couldn't resist, turning an espionage operation into a marketing opportunity. But perhaps the most significant impact was psychological. The Glebe Road case demonstrated to the American intelligence community that Soviet capabilities in illegal operations were more sophisticated than previously assumed, but also that those operations remained vulnerable to alert observation and methodical investigation. It was a reminder that Cold War espionage wasn't always conducted through high-tech satellite surveillance or cryptographic breakthroughs. Sometimes it came down to someone in a warehouse noticing that an order didn't make sense. December 5th, 2003. 25 years to the day after the arrests. FBI headquarters, Washington, D.C. Fifth floor conference room. The anniversary gathering was unofficial, organized by retired agents who'd worked the case. Robert Callahan was still alive then, 74 years old, moving slowly but mentally sharp. Linda Romano attended, now a federal magistrate. Patricia Wharton sent a note from CIA headquarters. Her schedule didn't permit attendance, but she wanted the agents to know she remembered. Tommy Breslin was there too, invited by Callahan personally. He'd driven down from Philadelphia, where he'd retired after Stop and Shop closed its Alexandria distribution center in 1994. He brought a guest, his grandson, a senior at Temple University studying criminal justice. "Tell them how you figured it out," the grandson said, excited to be meeting real FBI agents. Breslin shrugged, uncomfortable with attention. "I didn't figure out anything. I just knew tomatoes." "But you called it in," Callahan said. "That's what mattered. You noticed something was wrong, and you reported it. That's what good intelligence work is. Noticing what doesn't fit." Someone had brought a can of San Marzano tomatoes, set it on the conference table as a centerpiece. It sat there among the coffee cups and legal pads, a mundane object that represented something larger. The idea that intelligence operations, no matter how sophisticated, had to touch the physical world somewhere. They needed food, electricity, phone lines, mail delivery. Those touch points created vulnerabilities. And sometimes, someone was watching. "The thing I always wondered," Breslin said, studying the tomato can, "is whether they knew. The Russians, I mean. When they picked tomatoes for their smuggling, did they know some warehouse guy might notice the order was weird? Or did they think nobody paid attention to that stuff?" Callahan smiled. "The KGB postmortem said they chose San Marzano specifically because they came in opaque metal cans. They thought they'd covered every technical angle, X-ray opacity, customs inspection, even the cultural fit with Italian cover identities. But they didn't account for human expertise. They didn't think about guys like you who actually knew the business and could tell when an order was off. That's the thing about patterns, Romano added. They work both ways. The Soviets used ethnic patterns to hide. Italian groceries, Italian neighborhoods, Italian names. But those same patterns created expectations. When something deviated from what should be normal, people who lived in that world noticed. The conversation drifted, as old case discussions do, through technical details and personal anecdotes. Someone mentioned that Dmitry Polyakov had been released in a spy swap and returned to Russia. Someone else had heard that Natalia Volkova had written her memoirs while in prison, but the Bureau had successfully blocked publication. Viktor Chernyak's death in 1994 was noted somberly. He'd maintained his silence to the end, refusing to cooperate even when offered sentence reductions. As the gathering wound down, Callahan pulled Breslin aside. "I wanted to thank you properly. The Bureau gave you that flag, but I don't think we ever explained what you actually accomplished. Those 4 illegals? They were part of a network that had penetrated some of our most sensitive agencies. The intelligence they'd stolen, if it had reached Moscow, it would have compromised satellite systems, diplomatic initiatives, maybe even covert operations. People could have died. You prevented that." Breslin looked uncomfortable. "I just made a phone call about tomatoes." "You made a phone call about tomatoes that changed the Cold War," Callahan said. "Maybe just a little. Maybe not enough that history books will talk about it. But it mattered." Years later, after Callahan's death in 2010, his family found a file in his home office labeled Glebe Road, Personal Notes. Inside were his handwritten observations from the investigation, copies of reports, photographs of the apartment building, and a single page dated December 5th, 1978, with a brief note. "Remember, intelligence is often discovered by the people who have no idea they're doing intelligence work. Breslin knew tomatoes. We knew spies. Together, we did something neither could have done alone." The file room at FBI headquarters, sublevel 2, climate-controlled and access-restricted. Row after row of evidence boxes from closed cases, tagged with numbers and dates. Box 65 HQ71140 EVAD contains 2 metal cans, dented now from handling, their labels faded. San Marzano tomatoes, product of Italy, imported 1978. Inside one can, if you were to open it today, you'd find dried tomato residue, oxidized and dark. The metal cylinder that once held microfilm is stored elsewhere, in a more secure facility, cataloged with other Cold War artifacts. But the can itself remains, a steel vessel that once held secrets. Next to it in the box, evidence tag numbered 71140B, the ledger from Viktor Chernyak's apartment, the handwritten log of stolen intelligence. The entries are in Russian, in precise Cyrillic script, each line documenting a piece of classified information photographed, encoded, and transmitted. The ledger ends abruptly on December 4th, 1978, the last entry made the night before the FBI arrived. The final line reads, "Package prepared for transmission via standard protocol. Delivery scheduled 05 DEC 78. Contents: Kennan imagery analysis, classification TS/SCI, pages 127. That package was never transmitted. It was sitting on a kitchen table in apartment 23D when Dmitry Polyakov was arrested. The intelligence it contained, technical analysis of American reconnaissance satellite capabilities, remained secure. The satellites continued their missions, photographing Soviet military installations, tracking missile deployments, providing the strategic warning that helped keep the Cold War cold. All because someone noticed an unusual tomato order. The ledger sits in its evidence box, pages yellowing, ink fading. 46 years after the arrests, most of the participants are dead. Polyakov returned to Russia and vanished into retirement, location unknown. Volkova was released in 2005, deported to Russia, last known living in Moscow. Chernyak died in prison. Mikhailov died and still imprisoned. Callahan, Romano, Wharton, retired or deceased. Their classified accomplishments known only to those with the proper clearances. Tommy Breslin died in 2003, a few months after that anniversary gathering. His obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer mentioned his decades of work in grocery distribution, but said nothing about espionage or FBI commendations. His grandson still has the flag that flew over FBI headquarters, though he doesn't know the full story of why his grandfather received it. The Stop and Shop distribution center in Alexandria was demolished in 2001, replaced by a condominium development. The site where Tommy Breslin first noticed order number 4477 is now somebody's kitchen. Granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. The people who live there unaware that an espionage case began in that space. 2847 Glebe Road still stands, renovated and rebranded as Arlington Heights Apartments. The units where Soviet illegals once lived now house young professionals, families, students. Nobody knows which apartments they were. The FBI redacted the specific unit numbers in all declassified documents. Somewhere in that building, someone sleeps in the bedroom where Dmitry Polyakov once opened cans of tomatoes and retrieved Soviet intelligence packages. Someone else watches television in the living room where Viktor Chernyak kept his meticulous ledger of American secrets. The building changed hands several times. Riverside Property Management LLC was dissolved after the arrests, its assets seized by the federal government. The true ownership was never definitively established. The trail of shell companies led back to Moscow, but the Soviet government denied any connection. The apartments were sold at auction. The buyers had no idea of the building's history. In the intelligence community, the Glebe Road case remains a teaching example. FBI counterintelligence trainees study it at Quantico. CIA case officers learn about it in tradecraft courses at Camp Peary. The lesson is always the same. Sophisticated operations can be undone by attention to detail, by people who know what normal looks like and recognize when something deviates from it. But there's another lesson, one less often discussed. The KGB learned from Glebe Road. They adapted. They eliminated the regular patterns, randomized their protocols, made their operations harder to detect. The next generation of illegals, the ones arrested in 2010, the ones probably still operating today, don't make the same mistakes Polyakov and his network made, which means somewhere, right now, there might be another apartment like 23D. Another commercial cover like Riverside Property Management, another supply chain being exploited for intelligence purposes. The pattern won't be tomatoes this time. It'll be something else, something equally mundane, something that blends into the background noise of American commercial life. And the only way it'll be detected is if someone, somewhere, notices that something doesn't fit. Someone who knows their business well enough to recognize an anomaly. Someone like Tommy Breslin, who understood that 3 cases of premium tomatoes every 3 weeks was just wrong. The can sits in its evidence box. The ledger yellows. The secrets they held have long since become obsolete. The Kennan satellites were decommissioned decades ago, replaced by newer systems with different capabilities. The specific intelligence Chernyak stole and Polyakov tried to transmit no longer matters to American national security. But the principle remains. Intelligence work is pattern recognition. Espionage is deviation from normal. Security depends on people paying attention, trusting their expertise, making phone calls about things that seem off. The Cold War is over. The Soviet Union collapsed. The KGB became the FSR, became the SVR, adapted and evolved. Russian intelligence still runs illegals in the United States. Chinese intelligence has joined the game, with networks that make Soviet operations look amateurish in comparison. The threats change, but the underlying reality doesn't. Somewhere, right now, someone is trying to steal American secrets. And somewhere, right now, someone might notice something wrong. A delivery that doesn't make sense. An order that's too large. A payment that comes from the wrong account. A pattern that deviates just enough to catch the eye of someone who knows what normal looks like. That's the real legacy of the tomatoes. Not the arrests, not the intelligence windfall, not even the mole hunt that followed. The legacy is the reminder that security isn't just about sophisticated technology, or massive budgets, or complex operations. Sometimes it's about a warehouse supervisor who makes a phone call because something bothers him about an order. The file box closes. The evidence room door locks. The case number fades into history, remembered by fewer people each year as the participants die, and the Cold War becomes something that happened to other people in another time. But the can remains. San Marzano tomatoes, product of Italy, imported 1978. Steel and paper and dried residue. A mundane object that once held the weight of secrets, the currency of empires, the attention of intelligence agencies on both sides of the Iron Curtain, and all because someone thought the order was wrong.